I basically work with the Council for the International Exchange of Scholars. We administer the Fulbright Scholar Program, including administrator program. And feel free, since it's, to ask me one-on-one if you'd like any direct questions or as we go along. I'm just going to do basic overview of the program and just the opportunities, what countries are participating. Yeah, and then that's basically it.
Okay.
So I'm not sure how familiar you are with the history of the program, or
More about him. As part of my PhD, I did a paper on Fulbright when he was in Arkansas.
oh really?
So that was.
So you know all about how he was a Rhodes Scholar and
Yeah,
what
and I sort of
motivated
transitioned back and
him.
forth.
You got it. So
But I've not paid since that paper in my first year of my PhD. I haven't looked back at it, but it was at that point sort of looking at, well, maybe this would be something I would do after I completed my doctorate. So I've got my defense scheduled for 3 weeks from today.
oh.
So now that I was like, oh, this is very timely.
Well, it's free time, found time.
I'm about to become very, very free.
Okay.
So that's what sort of restarted that.
And you also work in the administration?
I'm the university registrar here.
Registrar, right, okay, perfect. Well, I guess for the sake more of the recording, I'll go through the usual details, but you'll probably know more than me about Senator Fulbright. But we did have this program, the inception of it in 1946, and hello, welcome. We just got started, so feel free. But basically, the program was designed to do mutual exchange of both academics and professionals globally, and we've expanded out over the course of the years, and now have about 155 countries participating in Fulbright. And from over the past 60 plus years, we've had very high success rates of our Fulbright scholars, have continued on to do amazing things. So don't be intimidated though if you're not a Pulitzer Prize winner or won a Nobel. But just to keep in mind that the program has been very successful for professionals and academics in their careers. So just to keep in mind. Basically, this session though is about the administrator program. That's actually a fairly new program in the sense of how it's developed and grown. It started just a few years ago with 2 countries participating, and now we have 5 countries on board with it, and we're hoping to expand it out in the coming years as well. So right now our participating countries are Japan, Korea, India, Germany, and France. The United Kingdom was a participant as of last year, but right now they discontinued it for the time being. So we're still pending to hear back from the UK if they're interested. But for these 5 countries, though, the overarching thematic is a 2-week seminar where you would be able to have a robust schedule already set up for you and a group of administrators to not just visit universities and establish initial ties and relations, but more importantly, learn the overall higher education structure and culture, meet with everyone and anyone from the primary school education systems, getting tours of them, to meeting government officials and administrative education. So we tried to design the program over the course of the years to be holistic and just more of an initial step for you to gain interest in learning more about their education system and possibly establishing relations in the future for your university. The basic eligibility requirements at the time of application: you must be a U.S. citizen. PhD is not required, nor a language proficiency requirement. So the more important, though, criteria that we're looking for is that in your job description that you are responsible at your university for at least 25% of creating international education expansion in your university, either through involvement with trying to increase international student exchanges, or having more American students go abroad, or diversifying your faculty. So some component of your job, it has to be evident when you apply that this is relevant to the work that you're doing.
Can it also be permanent resident?
I'm sorry?
Do you have to be a citizen, or can you be permanent resident?
You have to be a citizen, you have to be naturalized at the time of application or close around the time of application. Okay, see hesitation, but we at the time right now we don't have a visiting sister program at the moment. There's discussion about it, and it's really for the countries that are currently allowing the U.S. side to see if they would have similarly through Fulbright an administrator program for them to come to the United States. But as of right now, we formally don't have that. This is just the initial onset of trying to garner support for American educators to go to administrators to go abroad. I think there are several of the other State Department programs that do sponsor for visiting exchange that we can look into a little bit later. But basic prerequisites is that you have a demonstration of knowing the culture, language, and history of the country, that there's an expressed interest in it set as a prerequisite. But going any further than that, you do not have to be have experience of going there. That preference is actually for this to be your first time opportunity to get exposure to the country that you're interested in going to. Also just the general characteristics of having open-mindedness, cultural sensitivity, having experience with other cultures on campus or in your personal professional background should be demonstrated. So I'll go through each country's program very briefly and what they're looking for, because each country has slightly different requirements for the level of administration that they're seeking preference for. And also just so you have an idea of what the program encompasses, where you'll be traveling and whatnot. So for France, the application deadline is early February, and notification would come between March and June, but preferably earlier, to attend the seminar that would be 2 weeks in late October. The seminar is comprised of doing regional travel throughout France, and that would be visiting universities as well as meeting with government officials and educational professionals. So basically, this would be the overall activity for most countries, just the level of seniority is a little different for each one. So France looks for administrators that work directly with student programs, and also faculty administration as well are encouraged to apply. So, similarly, the deadline for Germany is February 3rd, and the seminar would take place late October. Both the French international administrators at the end of their program and the German administrators actually meet. So it's a nice networking opportunity. I think they met in Strasbourg. I have to double check that last year, but it's just part of getting an additional benefit of meeting not just French counterparts but German for both programs, so they have this built in. India is looking for senior administrators as opposed to junior, meaning that you've had at least 5 years experience in the capacities of working like in the Provost office or the deans. So it's a little bit higher level that they're looking for in the administrator qualifications. The seminars take place in New Delhi, but also in other major cities. And there's a lot of institutions that they build in for you to meet with, including a lot of NGOs that are involved with the higher education system there. So slightly different that their seminar occurs earlier. It occurs in March, and the deadline is actually August 1, which is in line with the rest of the Fulbright programs. So when you're looking through, I'll show you on my website in a minute where you can find these award descriptions. We have an online catalog that is for our core Fulbright for faculty that include listings for the administrators. So just to make sure you're not confused by the different ones, just make sure you do a search for administrators seminar, and it'll come up with only those 5 for you. I can speak a little bit more about Japan and Korea that are up next because that's my regional background. But for Japan, what's interesting is that they recently changed the requirement. They're actually, they're looking for senior level. Japan and Korea usually mimic each other with requirements for the awards, but Japan has maintained still looking for senior level administrators, while Korea, on the other hand, has just recently changed it so that they're looking more for junior level administrator, lesser years experience, not looking for senior level provosts, etc., dean level. So anyone who's even faculty administration as well, chairs, heads of departments are encouraged. So that's a recent change. For Japan, again, the deadline is actually approaching. It's November 1. The seminar takes place in June for 2 weeks. So I'll actually be doing a webinar in more depth about the Japan and Korea programs next week on October 1. So I encourage you to take a look at the website to register. Same with Korea, the visits usually take place in Seoul and the DMZ, but other selected cities have been added on. It's really, for each seminar, a whirlwind. I'm always impressed at the many places they seem to pack in and activities, enrichment activities included with the seminar. So basically, it's all set up for you, and we just ask that you have high energy and are willing to work with us in the various settings that we take you to. The deadline, of course, like I mentioned, is November 1st for both Japan and Korea, and the seminars take place in June. They're all very redundant, just giving you an example and some pictures. I wish I had an opportunity to bring an alum here to actually speak about how they networked and what came of their time, but most of the folks that have been administrators under Fulbright have benefited greatly from launching initiatives, relations later on with institutions that they've met with during their time there. But more importantly, creating these linkages, it's not just about creating those linkages, it's also about understanding holistically the culture and methodologies of why they have in place certain systems that may differ from the U.S. side. So it's really about looking at the comparative studies and also sharing that information with your colleagues that you meet there in the long term. So keeping that in mind when you're writing your statements, that it's 3 to 5 pages. When you're applying, it's a little tricky, I said, because it's embedded with the core program. So the application that you're going to be entering your information into is used as well for faculty. So there's a lot of sections that are not applicable to you when you're going through it. So to focus strictly on just the project statement and something different from what the faculty do not have to do, an institutional statement, which speaks about the needs for your institution, of what would be the benefit of you going, what's currently in place or what's not in place, and what you're hoping to have developed during your time as an administrator, and how you would share this information with your colleagues. So the resume is also consolidated. We ask that you have no more than 6 pages. And anytime you would like for us to review any of your drafts, CIS, myself, as well as my colleagues that work in the different regions are available to assist you, but we ask that you try to do it not the day before the deadline. I kind of went over this a little bit, but in the project statement, just your current responsibilities, how this relates. the minimum requirement for a lot of countries, some are more stricter in their terms, their language than others. So for example, Japan is stricter in saying that you must have a minimum of 25%. I would say across the board that's relevant, though Japan makes it more explicit in their description. I've had some folks that are faculty administrators that have worked on doing student exchanges and wanted to know if they qualify. So for example, Korea would allow it for a faculty administrator who does exchanges grassroots level for their department, as opposed to someone who's more senior level who does managerial work and directly supervises faculty. That's the type of administration that Japan is seeking. So there's slightly different angles that they're looking at on who amongst the administration can qualify, so just pay careful attention in the award description to that. Also thinking, I say it's the onion, peel back the layers of impact of your work, look at it from not just your personal benefit for yourself, look at it how it would benefit your department, students, faculty, as well as long-term commitments overall with your institution, and also the local community surrounding your university. I only mention this because it's for consolidated project statements, so to think big picture as well as molecular and detail and with strong assertions for your reasons for going can sometimes be challenging. So trying to work that in and have it reviewed by several people is always helpful in advance. And again, secondly, last part that it says here about what you've learned, making sure you've built in what are your plans when you return for sharing and disseminating the information, making sure you have a good framework laid out. That was the shortest presentation I've given so far. But I'm happy to answer any particular questions. Most of the countries you'll see in the catalog have advertised up to 10 grants for this opportunity. It varies year to year depending on the number of applications and also funding, but that's been traditionally the amount per country. We're hoping to expand to other countries in 2016-17 so that this is more this is a program that's only starting to really snowball, and we're seeing the repercussions of how it benefits our other Fulbright programs. I think it's important that administrators get a sense of the importance of internationalization, especially a lot of schools that do not have this opportunity otherwise for funding or resources. It's a great outlet to build on, and to then encourage your faculty and students to then apply for Fulbrights to also continue on the trend of exchange with these countries. So, some food for thought.
So,
Oh, go ahead.
We're a very comprehensive university, so we could offer potentially faculty exchange, undergraduate exchange, graduate exchange. Don directs a language and culture institute, so there's English language and culture training that's potentially available. I mean, are we better off painting a more holistic picture, or are some countries more interested in some of those areas than others, or we could provide more emphasis on a particular facet of what we have to offer?
So it's looking at it as when you're just identifying which country, part of it is looking at how much of your student population that you currently have. Do you have a high amount of Korean students or faculty that
Koreans
are
make up
here?
they're the second largest component of our undergraduate students, but there are only about 50 of them, so it's not a huge number.
Probably in terms of need for developing a population, it could be Korea, it could also be Japan.
Japan would be yeah.
Or Europe, I mean, in general.
Mm-hmm.
We have about 550 Chinese undergraduates. That's the largest, and then the second largest is Korean, so that's 50, and then it drops to tens and single digits pretty quickly from there.
Yeah.
Graduate students, I think we've got about 1,500 or 2,000.
China,
Predominantly-
500 from China, 100 from South Korea, 90
100 South Korea,
from
okay.
India.
Okay.
So looking at that as your overall student population, showing that though there may be some presence, that it's nominal, what are your visions of how you would like to see it grow and why? what fields, what areas for research example, how would this benefit for collaborative efforts. Trying to go into that type of level of needs assessment in the project statement. So you're looking at your overall student population, but narrow it down to why particularly this segment, why this country, how would it benefit, and then look at it from the other side. What knowledge, this is where you need to do some background research on institutions that exist in Korea, and what level of exchanges have they done with what institutions, how would Virginia Tech differ, what would be the uniqueness, perhaps demographic, location, what you specialize in, add those points into your statements for your institution.
The other thing we need to explore is how much previous contact or work with the country
Yes.
disqualifies us, because we definitely have research collaboration with Korea. Our engineering college works a lot with their defense industry. Okay, so there's a lot of high-tech STEM research, collaborative research going on, but obviously we could do a lot more to grow the student population. So is having that involvement at the research level going to disqualify perhaps Don from getting a grant to go to recruit students in English language training, or will they see the distinction between the two areas?
And also through that, though, how many of your faculty have gone, how has the exchange been?
That would be more difficult to assess because we don't really track those metrics.
Distributed across
Yeah.
the university.
Mhm.
So that's part of the challenge at our end, but
Well, that's why we're looking for folks that are in that role for doing those types of assessments to apply for this program, because they would have
that
because
position.
that type of information, I can see your counterparts in Korea being very interested in knowing.
Yeah, but there's nobody at this university that holds that position, that has the hand on all those different levers. We're a very decentralized organization, so each college and institute kind of operates on its own. I mean, I would probably be the closest to that, but
What about David Brady's office, because international travel has to go through, they have to get approved.
yeah, well, that's true. They could probably.
That's kind of, I think, why Korea when they initially were very much like the Japanese with wanting senior level administrators overarching review, but now they realize that they actually benefited more from folks that came from individual schools or departments that had more of a grasp of what was going on at the grassroots level with that particular school, rather than holistically with the university. So that's why they changed it just from last year, looking for folks that work strictly with the management within a division of the university as opposed to overarching management. So if it's particularly not maybe necessarily your School of Engineering, because if they already have established relations, perhaps looking at another division, another school that is lacking that, that could benefit, would be an opportunity. So I'm not sure who that person would be or what field you feel would benefit most. But
And that would make a difference. So if we were looking at research, it would be a different person than if we're looking at English language training. You know? So, okay.
yeah, and like I mentioned, right now we have 5 countries that are mainly participating in the administrator program, but we're hoping that we can try to garner support that showing what benefits have come from the program will increase buy-in from other particular countries that I feel the U.S. would benefit greatly from learning or having administrator exchanges. So you mentioned China, that's a big one that we're looking into.
Brazil would be nice.
Yeah. And Brazil has kicked in a great amount of interest in recent years with doing exchanges. They are actually one of our biggest funders right now for our Institute of International Education on setting up student exchanges. We have some incredible amount, like over 100,000 per year right now, Brazilian students. It's something incredible set up. So the ministry has really shifted gears on their funding. So it's interesting to see if they would also support moving beyond the students to more faculty and administrators. So these are all kind of gradual movements that we're making because we understand that, you know, it's kind of a holistic approach for Fulbright now that we're looking at for universities for higher education, not just student exchange, faculty exchange, but we're realizing the importance of administrators having a knowledge base of why there's value to having more encouraging support for faculty and students to do these types of programs. So but the overall basis, the idea, the concept behind why we created this was really so that you can kind of get a